It truly is a new world. Familiar, but different enough that it sets your senses on edge. It's how the sun plays on the red rocks in the west, or the way that the wind rolls through the prairie grasses. So alien, so other. Today on the Comic Book Report, The Sixth Gun, Shadow Roads. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm excited to finally round out the greater Sixth Gun universe, at least to date, with the Sixth Gun Shadow Roads Omnibus from Oni Press. After the events of the first three omnibuses that completed the main series, Cullen Bunn and team created this kind of spin-off sequel work, and I can't wait to dive in today. Before we do, just a huge thank you to those at Oni Press for sending us this review copy in exchange for an honest review. I had a blast with it, and I think with that said, let's go ahead and jump into today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurtt, and illustrated by A.C. Zumito and Brian Hurtt. The issues in this collection were published by Oni Press beginning in 2018. The volume itself collects The Sixth Gun, Shadow Roads, issues 1 through 10. And finally, this is a standard size trade paperback edition with glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 256 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first dedicated look at today's paperback collection from Oni Press. As you can see, if you've watched any of my previous videos on the Sixth Gun Omnibus editions, this really does copy a similar format. We have that beautiful black and white framing, how the text is all laid out. It's very indicative of what we've seen before with the previous collections. I'll actually do a comparison shot to the other three Omnibus editions for this round of releases, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about in regards to the uniformity. On the spine here, again, very similar kind of design work. We do have the Sixth Gun, Shadow Roads, and we are calling it an omnibus, even though it's a standard size, kind of smaller paperback, but it does include the full 10-issue series. I have heard word that Cullen Bunn and team plan to return in some form to the Sixth Gun universe sometime this year or so we'll see. This is probably not the end for this franchise, which I'm excited about, but I was happy to read this entry. The back of the collection today has that nice similar black and white frame, blurb about the book, a bit of an accolade. We have some pricing information, things like that. We have some little design work. Again, very, very similar to what we had on the previous Sixth Gun Omnibus editions, which I love to see. You know, this is kind of a sequel or spin-off. I'll get more onto that in a minute. But I just can really appreciate an edition or a set of volumes that have this degree of attention to detail with the consistency. And now a quick look at that binding. As I mentioned earlier, it is a glued binding, and being a smaller collection, there really isn't too much gutter loss or anything that I picked up on. I thought that this was a pretty well done binding. I had no real complaints here. After we finish that look there, that has been the exteriors and kind of build of the book. Now I did want to go ahead and transition over to the comparison shots with the other three Sixth Gun Omnibus paperback editions that were released in this reprint run for Sixth Gun. As you can see, beautiful uniformity with these editions. You can see all three of the previous Sixth Gun Omnibus paperbacks all share this same kind of design, layout, and formatting, which I loved. This Shadow Roads edition is probably the most dissimilar because it has its own secondary title, being Shadow Roads, of course. It is a bit smaller and more slender of a volume, but yeah, still really gorgeous. Now, I will show you a spine shot as well, just so you can see how they all look on a bookcase. I personally am a huge fan of this. I think they look great. If you're interested in my coverage of the first three omnibus editions, which collect the entire main series of the Sixth Gun, you can find it on my channel. So to date, with those previous three omnibuses and this review here for Shadow Roads, my channel will have covered everything within this Sixth Gun universe. Okay, and as we dive into the collection proper here, we start with, your title page, publication information things, creator breakdown page, and then we have a full numbered table of contents, which I love seeing for all of those 10 issues. The formatting of that done in the same way it was done with the previous 3 collections. Again, I love that uniformity and attention to detail. And then we have Chapter 1 of Shadow Roads. Now, like the previous omnibuses, unfortunately, we do not get the covers for these issues in this collection whatsoever. We don't have them between issues. We don't have them at the back. Again, probably the biggest drawback for these releases. I would have loved to see those covers. But in its stead, we do have these chapter break pages that occur during each of the issue transitions. So I do like that because it shows you exactly where you are in the issues, which is still very nice. But Shadow Roads opens up and we follow a whole new cast of characters. Before we jump into that though, you might be asking, can I read Shadow Roads by itself, or do I need to read the previous 3 omnibuses? Do I need to read the main Sixth Gun whole series and mythos? I would say that this work can stand alone completely. You don't need to read Sixth Gun whatsoever. This is very much a relaunch that's just set in the same universe. Now, with that being said, there is still substantial connective tissue between the Sixth Gun and this new series, Shadow Roads. But no, you don't need to know any of that to enjoy Shadow Roads by itself. I think when you dive in, though, we are introduced to a whole new set of characters, as I mentioned earlier. We have in the primary character seat, and I say primary, but really this is an ensemble work, but I still think the most main character is the character of Henry. He's a Native American who was raised in London, kind of completely separated from his Native American heritage, and he is kind of gifted a sort of ancestral kind of sword or spearhead kind of weapon, and it kind of helps bring forth these like powers, and he's immediately thrown into a larger world. Along for the ride with him is his best friend Barry, who's kind of a college buddy, and they get just again thrown into this world. They meet up pretty soon with Miss Abigail Redmayne and Kofu, who we might recognize from the Sixth Gun as actually Gord, one of the main ensemble allies. He's going by the name of the Crossroad Creature now in this world, or in this series, I should say, but he's really recognizable as Gord from our last series. And you might recognize Abigail as well. She was a character that was more prevalent in one of the mini-series. She was a character that sadly did lose her life, so her appearance here in Shadow Roads definitely begs some questions, but luckily we do get that filled in pretty soon after. So at the end of Sixth Gun, something happens that really changes the world forever, and I'll leave it at that. There really wasn't a ton of main characters from that really cross over into this work. In fact, again, the biggest connective tissues for me are Abigail and Gord here. But again, they're introduced as these people that kind of cross these sort of hidden passages and connective ways between the worlds, the Shadow Roads. And then Henry and Barry get kind of thrown into America, kind of figuring out what's going on. And again, everyone kind of gets caught up in this bigger conspiracy. We kind of lean into the more mystical, magical happenings, which is sort of fun as well. Rounding out the main ensemble cast as well, we have a young woman whose family was completely upended when they were murdered in kind of it almost looks like an Aztec kind of village or culture. We also have sort of another older gunslinger guy that has some mystic powers of his own. But yeah, this whole group really comes together, and part of the main early arcs of this is to basically for them all to defeat this creature known as the Hunter, who really kind of threatens the world and the norms and everything. So it's a lot of these characters coming together, kind of taking their steps into this larger, more magical world and trying to defeat kind of an evil, basically. And again, we get little hints at some of the lore we had from the Sixth Gun, but this does feel like a new threat. It feels like its own thing. Now, I'm not going to hit every plot bit for Shadow Roads because I do want people to check this out for themselves as well. But I think if you enjoyed Sixth Gun, you have a pretty fair shot of enjoying this as well. There is some very similar themes and ideas. Sometimes the tone can feel similar, while also striking its own new direction. This does feel a little bit more modern in some ways than Sixth Gun. I don't know if because it takes place after after the events of Sixth Gun. The characters for me maybe didn't hit as hard as characters like Becky Moncrief and Drake Sinclair, but still some really good stuff here. I think the addition of characters like Henry, who has a really interesting kind of cultural background and upbringing, and kind of exploring his cultural identity, his parentage, and his links to some of these older cultures and maybe some of the powers that are included with some of them, I thought was one of the most fascinating parts of the journey. I also thought including Abigail and Gord from the first main series, they were also characters I really enjoyed because they kind of feel out of step for a while. Like, you look and you see Abigail knowing that she was kind of murdered in the first run. How did she come back, and what was Gord's role in that, and why is he going by the name of the Crossroad character, and what is his role and kind of whole era and being now in this world. And I like that these characters were still recognizable, but I like that Cullen Bunn and team repurposed them for the sake of this story. I think that, again, the strongest bits for me were maybe Henry's kind of coming of age story, learning about his own legacy and his own abilities. I really liked that. I will say I preferred the art by Brian Hurtt we got more throughout Sixth Gun, but what we have here is also really striking. It still feels very similar, in many ways similar enough. It looks crisp. It looks a little more maybe animated in certain ways, but I did like it. I liked it quite a bit still. I do think the art is maybe a little bit less of my taste compared to Sixth Gun proper, but still very, very good. Throughout these 10 issues, we do have like 2 or 3 kind of small story arcs, if you can believe it. They do defeat the Hunter, and then they go on to battle other kinds of evils. We have Henry link up with kind of the tribes and sort of the people carrying the power in those tribes. So we get more backstory about him. We see how he has his abilities, and it's really, really fun, you know. And the young woman who had her parents murdered, she kind of had her own vengeance in certain ways. And again, I don't want to spoil too much because I want people to really read it for themselves, especially if you enjoyed Sixth Gun. But yeah, I like it. You're still definitely in the kind of Western dark fantasy horror sandbox. So I think genre-wise, this is still very spot on with the Sixth Gun. I do think it feels a bit more, I don't want to say scattered, as if that's maybe too negative, but it does feel less focused as what we got with Sixth Gun. I never knew, like, arc to arc where we were going next, and honestly, by the end of the 10th issue, I felt like we were just starting. In fact, I will share this, that the series ends with all of the characters kind of getting together, you know, and we've seen these characters come from all these different backgrounds and kind of forming an uneasy team in some ways. We learn about some other groups that are also fighting kind of supernatural forces in the New World and the Americas. And anyway, it's like all of them got collected to face what happens next, and that's when this series ended. Before we get to that point, I do think the climax of the series and everything we got in the Act 3, in issues like 9 and 10, I think they were all really worthwhile, and they landed this plane successfully, so I wasn't disappointed with that, but I think the ending feels a bit abrupt or truncated once we get to the very, very end, because like I said, everyone's assembled to have these next adventures, and then as far as I know, that's the end of this story. Like I said, I heard that Cullen Bunn plans to revisit the world of Sixth Gun. I don't know if we'll get characters from the original series, or if we pick up with these characters from Shadow Roads, or some kind of mixture of the two, or their own set of new characters. I have no idea where we're going to go from here. But yeah, I was really bummed that this was so short-lived, because I felt like we were finally starting to hit our stride with it. But that's all she wrote for Shadow Roads. And just like some of the other omnibus editions, we really don't have many extras here. There's no extra miniseries or comics either. It's just creator bios to everyone that was involved with this collection, which was still nice to see, but I would have loved to see even behind-the-scenes artwork. Like I said, the cover gallery was probably the most missed out on. And that's the end of our collection today. That has been the Sixth Gun Shadow Roads Omnibus from Oni Press. Like I said, this was still a really fun read, one I would absolutely recommend to Sixth Gun fans, one I could still recommend to people just picking it up blind. Like, I will say I would have preferred more in this series. Hopefully we'll get some in the future, but for what it is, I thought it was still a really fun ride. And now, the grade. for successfully spinning off the world of The Sixth Gun in its own fun Western dark fantasy series. The Comic Book Report is happy to give The Sixth Gun Shadow Roads Omnibus a B. This is still an above average read for me, no questions asked. I love that the creators brought something new to the table, but I did miss out on some of my fan favorite characters, and I think not having the centralized lore of the mystical guns made this series feel a bit more scattered and less focused than the previous iteration. All that aside, I still thought that this was a fantastic standalone Western dark fantasy paranormal series, and I thought it was still a fun follow-up to everything I enjoyed in the previous work. I do look forward to what we have in store for the future of this franchise, should the creators go ahead and give us more, but I am happy with everything we've seen so far and love that Oni Press had these wonderful additions. And that's really all I'll say about the series here. Let me know what you think. Have you read The Shadow Roads? Do you plan on reading it in the future? I'd love to get some conversations going. Do we have any Sixth Gun fans out there? Thank you all for watching, and a huge thank you again to Oni Press for sending over the review copy. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, comment, and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks everyone, have a good one.